Hi, today I'm joined by Dr. Richard Parker, who's our resident buildings expert and amazing buildings illustrator. Richard, hi, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Dani.
And we thought, so we had a fantastic chat last time, didn't we, about
We did.
buildings archaeology
Absolutely wonderful.
and about your drawings as well.
Yes.
And some of your illustrations that you do, well, all of them are absolutely fantastic. So what we thought we'd do with this one is actually look very closely in detail at actually one or two of your reconstruction drawings. And we thought this might be quite nice to focus on your typical farmhouse, your typical Devon farmhouse from the post-medieval period, so sort of 1500s onwards, and look at the kind of life of these farmhouses and how they changed through time. And there's quite a trend at the moment called cottage core and farm core. I don't know if you've heard of it, Richard.
I have, yes, actually.
And we thought, you know, this might be quite nice actually, because we're actually going to talk about the history, the archaeology of these buildings, of cottages and farmhouses that you find in Devon in the southwest of England. So we thought this might be quite fun.
Excellent.
So let's have a look at one of your fantastic drawings. And we thought we'd start with what is often thought of as a typical farmhouse. And this is a great example, your work at Stonehays.
Yes, it's a classic 3-room and cross passage house, and in its original form, you had it's a long rectangular building with a doorway more or less at the centre, and to one side of there was a passage running straight the way through the house from front to back, and to one side of that passage was a large room, which filled the end of the building, and the other side there were 2 rooms: the big central room, the hall, and then a smaller service room at the end of the hall, in the other end of the building. So you use the often the little inner room is a private place for the family, and the room at the other end of the house, beyond the entrance passage, is a kind of service room where dirty and wet work is done, that kind of thing.
So where the arrow is there that we're looking at on your illustration,
yep,
that's the main door.
That's the main door and the cross passage. So you can see that there are these low timber screens, yep, separating the various rooms. They don't go up into the roof. So the heat from the central fire in the hall, main open room where all the life and activity of the house happened, just rises straight up into the roof and through a hole in the ceiling, and can also spread over the top of the screens into the passage and into the inner room at the other end of the house.
So if we imagine that we're walking through that door there, so we're basically stepping into the middle of the house effectively, but into a large corridor, which we're calling a cross passage.
Yes, but it has no ceiling.
Okay.
So if you look up, you'll see right into the roof of the house and into the hall roof.
Wow.
And sometimes there is no wall on the other side. So you have these 2 partitions that rise just above head height, which serve to keep drafts out of the rooms to either side, but they don't go any higher than the first floor.
And that's weird, because that's so different, isn't it, to what you'd expect today. So you walk in, you've got these wooden panels. Are they decorated? What kind of colour would they be typically?
They can be decorated, and quite often the later you get, the more elaborate the decoration is. So in the early part of the period, the medieval period and the late medieval period, you might have arched doorways with carved spandrels. You certainly, from the 16th and 17th century, you're likely to get all sorts of lovely decorative paintings on the particularly on the hall side of the screen, you know, sort of twiddly things, sometimes the royal arms, but generally they're kind of just painted like in big zingy bands of red and green.
Nice. Okay, so then I guess we've got a choice then, haven't we? So we've gone in through the front door, we're in the cross passage, there's smoke above our heads, but there's rooms off to either side.
Yes.
So if we, looking at your picture, if we went off into the left, we would be heading into, which room is that?
That would be the open hall, where you can see the fire in the centre with a nice big bronze crock on the on the hearth, an open hearth in the middle of the room, no chimneys, just smoke rising straight up through the roof. So the whole room would be filled with sort of like a fog of smoke. They thought that was very healthy and very wholesome. They thought it helped to control lice and fleas and all the other things that ordinary Devon peasants were prone to in the Middle Ages.
Well, I mean, to be fair, okay, it can't have been great for your lungs, but actually, you know, at all. But it probably did keep insects away and fleas and all sorts of stuff. And, you know, so, I mean, people fumigate their houses today, don't they? So
there is a farmhouse called Bayleaf Farmhouse that you can visit at the Weald Downland Museum in Kent, I think, or Sussex or somewhere like that, where they actually have, they've reconstructed a genuine medieval farmhouse, and they have an open fire burning in the centre. And so you can actually walk in, and apparently all the smoke just stays well above head height in a kind of lovely, dizzy, plumy cloud. And so you're relatively clear down below, but it soots all the timbers. It turns all the roof timbers black. And I think you can see in my drawing that I'm trying to show how the central roof truss over the hall is blackened by the smoke, and the roof trusses at the opposite ends are slightly less blackened. And this is a very good way archaeologically to prove that a house had an open hall originally.
yeah, I mean, I remember when, for instance, when we were doing the Time Team Dig Village project up in Dunster, one of the key things that you were always hunting about in roofs for was soot blackening.
Oh, so exciting when you find it. It's just lovely. It's
Well,
like, you fall backwards through the hatch screaming, sort of, you know, with delight.
Yeah. I mean, and that
blackening.
That is really one of the key things, isn't it? If you've got a smoke blackened roof, you're looking at it's very early, isn't it? Because yes. It's pre-chimney, the fire's in the middle of the room.
It tends to be an indication that the house is medieval. And of course, the extent of the smoke blackening tells you all sorts of things about how the building was partitioned. And as you can see in my Stonehenge drawing, there is at one end of the house, they've built a partition, a wooden partition right the way up to the roof to enclose a first floor room where they've got a nice comfortable bed. And often these floors jettied out over the passage. So that means that the joists of the first floor stuck out over the top of the screen to make a really pretty sort of, you know, like the outside of a medieval house in a town, you know, the way the upper floors stick out at each level. Okay. And so this is very decorative and beautiful, and quite often they fitted nice little curvy braces to them and things like that. So you can tell whether it was built as one long open space with just low partitions originally, or whether it was built as a building with storied areas.
I see. Okay, so we're in the hall that's open to the roof. There's a fire in the middle, and there's a lovely crock or cauldron there bubbling away, making a nice broth or boiling water or whatever. And then there's another partition off to the left as well. So it looks like there's a little room there. What's going on in there?
That's the inner room. That would be either a private parlour where the family could just go, maybe even a bedroom. Sometimes it's used for you know, storage and domestic activities that aren't suitable for the main hall. So it can be a service room or a parlour or a posh room.
And what would be in that? So you'd have you know, a nice a settle to sit down on.
I'm really not sure that. I mean, I don't think many of these inner rooms survive with any of their original furnishings, so it's a bit difficult to tell. I mean, some of them might have been used as dairies. Like I say, they could be used for stores, they could be used for sculleries, but I think generally, if it's the room beyond the hall, you know, so you walk in for the main passage and then you come through the hall to get there, it's like a parlour. It's a nice, comfortable place for entertaining private guests, but often it's not heated, so the smoke and the warmth from the central fire in the hall percolates through over the top of the screen and warms that space as well.
Okay, and so then if we sort of journey back out through there, past the fire, out into the cross passageway, and then we go right. So there's another room there.
Yes.
What's going on there? Because that looks...
That's the service room at the lower end. So that is usually a sort of a rougher place. You know, that's a kind of that is for stores and for I mean that both ends of the house can be used for the same thing. The main living activity goes on in the middle in the hall, and you either have posh areas at one end or the other. We often talk about the high end and the low end of a medieval house. And the low end is where mucky activities took place, and the high end is where you had a degree of privacy. At Stonehenge, what we would think of as the low end appears to have been enclosed earlier on, and so it was probably being used as a sort of as a nice posh space.
And then above it, so this is one where we've actually, this doesn't go straight up to the rafters, does it? There's another room above there.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes, that those are sometimes an addition, and this is the really important thing about smoke blackening of roofs. You can tell if the whole roof is smoke blackened from one end to the other. You can tell whether the building was originally just one open space divided by low screens, or whether it was built from the beginning as a house with storied or floored elements. And at Stonehenge, we think that the low end to the right of the passage was floored from the beginning because the roof was a different form and it wasn't smoke blackened. So I think they had built that end of the house with an upper story, and so you can see there's a wooden partition rising up into the roof, what we call a closed truss, enclosing one of the principal A-frames of the roof. And beyond that, there is a comfortable upper room with no heating, but equally no smoke. where our imaginary Devon farmers, farming family, have installed a very nice canopied bed.
This is typically how you would build a house in 1500.
Thereabouts, yeah. That's the kind of your basic standard house for there. I mean, there are all sorts of variations. For if you're at a lower social level, you might have only 2 rooms, you know, 1 room each side of the cross passage. And at a very low social level, you might even just have a single room with a hearth in the middle and your main entrance coming straight into it.
Yeah, and I suppose we should say, yeah, they were often called hovels, weren't they? The 1-room houses.
I suppose so. But I mean, even they were probably more comfortable than where the very poor would have lived.
So obviously it's made of thatch, right? So that's straw, hay, well, straw. And the floors, what would have been the floors been made of?
Well, quite often just beaten earth. I mean, it depends. You can have, there are, if you could afford it, you'd probably put in some cobbling or something, but very often they just use a kind of either hardened earth, or they'd use lime ash, which is a mixture of lime and ash, and you just lay it down. It hardens pretty much like concrete, and it could be polished to a beautiful texture, so beautiful shininess. You can see lime ash floors still today in churches. I think there's a lime ash floor at Germans Week and also at Coleridge. It's really durable and very pretty, really.
But also it was a bit of an insecticide, wasn't it, lime? It had those kind of properties. And so you'll hear of things being lime washed, where you'd lime wash the wall or whitewash the wall, sometimes every year in your barn or in your larder or whatever. And not only did that sort of help reflect light, but it had these insecticidal properties as well.
And you'd coat shrouds in lime in times of plague. And you know, yeah. I want to be buried in a limed shroud. I think that's very nice, really. Ideal.
We've gone slightly off piste, Richard. Sorry. If we move on in time, so you've also done a picture of, or an illustration of Stonehenge in 1600. So we're moving on 100 years. The building's still standing, but obviously it's been adapted. So let's have a look at that.
You can see that the inner room at the beyond the hall has now been floored over as well. And like the room at the other end, it's got a little jetty sticking out over the earlier screen. So pass through the hall from the passage to the room at the end. And I've shown a solid wall, but you can just see there's that the first floor has been added here, and so there's now a chamber at both ends of the house. And gradually the house is being enclosed, but at this stage, apparently the open hall still survived, because we can date it by the style of the roof timbers. So in 1600 or thereabouts, the house still had an open hall at the centre, but both ends had now been floored over. So,
and do we know why that would have been?
A fashion for increase in private space, I think. So basically, either the family are getting richer and they are wanting somewhere to put their servants, so their servants will now sleep, instead of sleeping in the hall, they'd now have a loft to sleep in, or they have children and they want somewhere to put their children, and increasingly a desire to keep, you know, clothes and fabrics and people more clean. So by 1600, you're talking about plastering over things and putting in ceilings, you know, like the fabulous elaborate plaster ceilings you get in Elizabethan mansions. You sometimes get those at farmhouse level. So some wealthy yeoman farmer has decided, right, I'm going to celebrate my marriage by installing a magnificent new ceiling and making my house all white and clean and sweet, instead of the dusty old medieval smoky place that it used to be.
And just looking at the material, actually, because we talked about the floors and we talked about the thatch on the roof, but we haven't actually talked about the building material.
Well, I mean, Stonehenge is a stone house, and probably always was. I mean, very often, of course, in Devon, these houses would be made of cob, which is actually no less durable than stone, you know, as long as you look after it. And but Stonehenge was a stone house, yes, and it was probably quite a fancy place from the very start.
So this is made of local stone, okay. And so what else has changed? I guess not too much, really.
Not by this stage, no.
Okay.
But the important thing is that changes and improvements are being made, and that the family are upgrading. This is the beginning of a process where eventually the whole house will be floored over, and it will contain, instead of being essentially one very large room with low separations, it will become a warren of smaller rooms. So the next few drawings should show this process.
Okay, let's have a look then. So moving on into the next 100 years. So we're going on now to 1700. Whoa.
Yeah. By 1700, you shall see that the hall has now been floored over. The house is now 2 stories throughout. And also additional rooms have been built on the rear of the house, which is where, I mean, one of those was a dairy, and above it a cheese loft where cheeses could be stored. But you can see that now holes have been made in the earlier partitions to let people pass through from one first floor room to another.
Yeah.
And also you can see a chimney has been added.
Oh, yeah.
So suddenly, instead of and that's been added on the in the low end of the house, suggesting that was actually used as quite a fancy parlour. There probably were other heated rooms in the, but unfortunately no evidence of those. No evidence of chimneys survived later alterations. But so I mean, you can see how the process now. The house is now fully storied and contains a lot of rooms. Privacy has been increased, although you still have to walk through other people's bedrooms in order to get to your bedroom. This is why beds were usually enclosed by curtains or by panelling at this stage. And of course, there were very few of them. Beds were incredibly expensive and valued pieces of equipment. They were kind of like, they were where births and deaths took place. So they were kind of ceremonial furniture, and they were very big and very grand.
And they often, you see them recorded in wills, don't you? So that, you know, because it was one of your prized possessions to own a timber bed. Yes,
and you can see I put in the posh bedroom at the far end of the house. I put a nice 17th century style a 4-poster with a wooden canopy.
Very nice. And would it be fair to say that you might only have one bed in a house like that, or would there be beds in each room?
I think certainly inventory suggests that there weren't very many of them, and most people would sleep on pallets on the floor. And indeed, your servants might sleep on little pull-out beds that trundled out from underneath the main bed. So even at this even as late as the mid to late 17th century, people are still all sharing rooms. Your servants would sleep on the floor next to you, so when you wanted the chamber pot, you could yell for them.
And how many people do you think would be living in this house at this time?
Well, this is getting to be quite a grand house. I don't know for sure, but the family, the children and the servants. So I mean, and probably farm hands and farm labourers would be living in parts of it. They'd sort of doss down wherever they could, I think.
Then, if we move on, let's have a look at the
yes
1800s and see what's happened then.
Right, by this point, as you can see, they've got so interested in cleanliness, because at every stage before this, the whole roof structure, all the thatch, all the roof timbers have been exposed. So they've just literally you've been able to look up and see the thatch from the inside. And here you can see they've inserted a lot of new ceilings. So, and all the rooms will now be plastered over, walls, ceilings, and the floors will be sort of like improved with boarding, and so yes, it's a great increase in cleanliness. And you can also see that the lower area of the house has been now subdivided by other partitions, so the number of rooms is multiplying. And of course, somewhere I think there's a staircase. Yes, there it is in the middle. There's a new staircase rising up through what used to be the hall. So, whereas beforehand they might have used ladders, or they might have used any kind of ad hoc arrangement to get upstairs. Now there's a much grander staircase, and we are now in 1800, so the staircase is likely to be a thing of some beauty, intended for display.
They've put ceilings in above, in the second, the upper story. They've put ceilings in now.
Yeah.
And you would say, is that because of cleanliness, or did it keep warmth in, or why was that? So basically, they've created an attic, haven't they?
Yes, they have. All of those things really, but so mainly because it was not the fashion anymore to have all these like high rooms with the ceilings exposed. So all over the place in the 18th and from the late 17th century onward, you get this kind of mad fashion for plastering over stuff. Cover everything with plaster, and of course the Georgians, being terribly boring people, they coloured it all with a dismal stone coloured washes. So actually stone colour was one of the or drab was another colour they like to use. Drab.
We talked about that last time, actually, didn't we?
The Georgians. Oof.
I mean, what is it about the Georgians that you don't like so much, apart from the fact they had a colour called drab?
I think they were mean people. But there we are, never mind. It's irrelevant, really. But yes, you can also see that now the house has got lots more chimneys. It's got 3 chimneys now, and then probably there was probably also one in the middle at the front, which I've had to remove because of the cutaway. So it's got so a lot more rooms are heated now. So the standards of comfort and convenience and cleanliness have risen. This was no mean house. I don't think it ever was. It has always been a posh house, an impressive house for the region. I mean, of course, one doesn't know what sort of decorations were painted, because they tend to be covered up with modern wallpaper and stuff like that. But if you get a chance to strip one of these houses down, if it's being repaired or, God forbid, demolished, then you sometimes find all sorts of painted schemes and things, because they, at least up until the middle of the 18th century, people liked colour.
What kind of colours would they have been using then?
Well, they'd use anything that was available, but I mean, one of the you sometimes get walls hung with what they call stained cloths, where you'd hang great big sheets of canvas or something, and you'd paint those with kind of hunting scenes and forest scenes, and so lots of greeny, bluey, muddy sort of delightfully naive landscapes. But also you get red earth colours and things like that in Devon, and yellows, and I'd say it's not really my area of specialism, but it sometimes you see these extraordinary things. I mean, there's a house in Exeter which has the remains, just fragments of an enormous picture of St. George and the Dragon, where the dragon is all gilded and
Oh, wow.
spiky and terrifying and absolutely stunning. Wonderful stuff. I mean, I've worked on medieval wall paintings that were absolutely vile, and sort of, like the worst kind of 1970s wallpapers. There's huge kind of blobby flowers randomly blattered all over the wall, and also you get these kind of like, massive stripy effects where a big vertical panel of blue next to a big vertical panel of red, and sort of white strapwork frieze at the top with them, sort of jewel work, and sort of strapwork is like a kind of style of drawing where it looks like cut leather that's sort of curling, very popular in the 17th century.
And also, it sounds a little bit, because you get in the Greek period, in the Roman period, quite gaudy colours, don't you? And that they're not afraid to paint things crazy colours. And I think there's a similar trend there from the medieval period through, isn't there, actually, until, like you say, until the Georgian period.
And when this kind of stifling gentility comes in. I'm not remotely stifling. I'm not remotely genteel, as you can tell by my furniture. Good Lord, no.
I see you're on your archaeological throne again, by the way.
I am indeed. Yes, it's my work throne. Obviously one has to have a throne for work.
Let's move on to the 1900s then, and have a look what happened.
Well, this is the final phase of the house. It just is showing the house is pretty much as it is today. It's all it's fully storied. The exterior is all rendered. Lots and lots of modern windows replacing the original little tiny ones. So that's just to say that that last drawing was done so that the owners of the house and their visitors could sort of locate themselves by kind of regressing the sequence of drawings backwards, and so they could recognize the house they were standing in front of and find out where they were. So the weird thing is that although the passage has moved slightly, it's still pretty much in the center of the house. So some things in the layout of this house just have never changed from when it was first built. Yeah,
for 500 years, people have been walking through that entranceway, through that passageway. Amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think what's really interesting as well is, you would look at that and you go, oh, well, that's a pretty old house. It's thatched and whatnot. But you might not necessarily think, hang on a minute, that dates back to the 1500s, and it was once had a cross passage and a hall going up to the rafters with a fire in the middle. You can't tell that from outside, and because it's changed so much, can you?
Somebody has tidied it up, trying to make the front all symmetrical. So and regular. So central doorway and 2 pairs of windows either side and one above. And you could only tell really this is a proper vernacular house by the fact that one of the chimneys still sticks up off center. So always there's some little traitorous little sign that for all your gentility, for all your desire to be symmetrical and perfect and prim, the real guts of the place are different.
And that's because it's off center, because that's the chimney in 1600s, is it? And it's still there.
Into one side of the passage, yes.
That's amazing, isn't it? How things kind of almost get fossilized within a building. Like you say, being able to read a building so you know what you're looking for, little giveaway clues like the smoke blackening, for instance. And that's a real skill to be able to do that, to be able to bring out what it looked like in 1500 when so much of it has been chopped and changed.
I do love it, actually. It makes life more interesting. If you look at the buildings around you and you think they're not static, they're always changing. They will always be changing as long as they last. So everyone puts on new wallpaper or a new kitchen, and quite often now, unfortunately, people tend to whack out the windows and put in brand new plastic ones that last about 15 years. It's just but the world is interesting. It's more interesting when you examine it with an inquisitive eye.
I love it when you walk down old high streets and there's this lovely mishmash of different buildings, different building materials, different roof levels. Some will be higher than others, different windows.
adds a spice to life.
Yeah.
Always look up above the shop fronts.
Because their upper stories will quite often be retained.
As long may it be so. The interesting thing, of course, is that the upper stories quite often have a flat Georgian front on, but you can sometimes tell from the pattern of the windows or from little hints, little sort of like irregularities, that there's something much more interesting going on behind.
I love talking about this with you, Richard, and I really think that these illustrations are amazing because, you know, like they say, a picture paints 1,000 words, don't they? And you know, here you go, case in point. You know, you could write an absolute tome, an archaeological report about, oh, it's rectangular in plan and it's got this, 10 meters across, blah blah blah, chimney stack. You can write all that, but actually to be able to see that, that really brings it to life. It really does, and I think it's amazing that people are going to be able to visualize what Devon farmhouses are like, going all the way back from 1500s right up until the present day, actually, and to be able to understand that phasing, how they change through time. I think it's just so well explained in your illustrations. It's genius, really amazing.
You're very, very kind. I do love doing these drawings. They sometimes take longer and are more frustrating than you can imagine, because you sometimes get these situations you can't quite, you know, you can't resolve this. You know, what did happen here? But and you can slow down you're going to sit poring over it for weeks. But yeah, if you're lucky, it goes well, and the house just, they like having their souls bared, I think.
That, you know, this is the work of buildings archaeologists, field archaeologists, and so on. You know, by writing these reports, by making a record, by photographing, drawing things, describing things really meticulously, yes, you're then passing that information on to future generations. Yeah. And so even if something's gone, there's actually a record of it, and yeah, people could come back in hundreds of years' time and pick up the record, read the archaeological report, or look at your illustration or photographs and go, ah, yeah, that's what it was like, rather than having no information, you know.
The lovely thing about these houses, which is why they are so precious, is because they are accumulations. You know, they're not like some Georgian mansions. They're not sort of like put down one massive fiat, you know, thump on the earth. They've actually grown out of the earth, literally out of the earth and out of the fields around them. And they have responded for generations to the needs of the family who occupied them, and, you know, often for hundreds upon hundreds of years. So you know, you could build a modern one like them, but somehow the reason the original building, the real building, is so precious is because it is the real artifact. You know.
Oh, Richard, thank you so much for sharing your illustrations with us and your incredible in-depth knowledge about all these buildings, these wonderful farmhouses that were built during the late medieval period, 1500s, and some of them are still standing today. It's amazing, isn't it?
And will probably stand for many other hundreds of years, you know, because they're that durable. They shrug off time.
Thank you so much for that fun chat, and we'll hopefully catch up with you again soon.
To ensure you catch all the latest updates, please do subscribe to this channel, follow us on social media, sign up to our newsletter, and join us on Patreon.